going to successfully implement an IoT solution, you have to have a specific problem to address, and then you have to successfully address that problem, prove that you've addressed it, and show what the value is.
Welcome to the last episode of the One ClearThing series. During our conversations, we became familiar with ClearBlade's business model and technical solutions. We covered various topics crucial to understanding the Internet of Things domain and operating in this space. Now it's time to switch our perspective and consider how customers can start their IoT journey by leveraging ClearBlade's capabilities from technical perspective. For that conversation, I invited Brent Chandler, the Vice President of ClearBlade focused on worldwide marketing and sales. Hello, Brent. It's great to meet you.
Hello, Lucas. Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Let's start by sharing your background with the audience.
I'm the VP of Worldwide Sales for ClearBlade, so I'm ultimately responsible for all of our customer and partner relationships. I have been in the IT and software space in some sort of sales capacity for the last 30 years. And I have been here at ClearBlade for the 8 years in October. So was fairly early into the IoT space and have seen a lot of change, seen a lot of companies doing different things and a lot of customer use cases.
As the Vice President focused on sales, you meet versatile organizations at various stages on the IoT journey. What is the typical theme you see across the board?
Well, a couple things. I think it's interesting because I think recently there's been quite a bit of negativity around IoT in general out in media. But I think what you really have to do is ask yourself a question and say, do you think there are going to be more or fewer connected devices in the future? And if the answer is more, then I believe that IoT represents really a tremendous growth opportunity. And we're just really starting to see kind of the beginnings of that. What we're seeing within customers is that IoT is becoming a much more strategic part of the business. A lot of companies are, they're creating digital transformation groups within the organization. And a lot of those digital transformation groups are responsible for driving IoT initiatives. We're seeing budgets increase. So I think that's all very positive. I think that you look at kind of what's happened in the past, and a lot of companies have tried a lot of different things, a lot of proof of concepts, a lot of trying to kind of build custom bespoke solutions, and there have been a lot of IoT failures, and that's resulted in, I think, slower growth and adoption compared to what a lot of the analysts were predicting over the last few years. So, I think companies are frustrated. They've had these experiences. They tried either building things on their own, or they've tried going down the path of deploying point solutions to address various problems. But at the end of the day, those approaches have led to the situation we're in today because they just don't scale. They're very difficult to integrate those data sets and to support and scale when you start getting into hundreds of thousands or millions of devices. And so I think given the combination of those things, there's a lot of enterprises now that are looking at this and say, we have to do this, but there has to be a different way. There has to be a better way.
Just by looking at the history, we will have more and more connected devices, more and more connected applications. And that seems like this is where the world is heading. And at the same time, I've seen some kind of decline in interest of IoT because of what you just said. It is pretty difficult to make that IoT to the next level, to escape that POC stage. And for sure, when you meet with executives, they share some stories about internal proof of concepts that went wrong or maybe went right, but after that they were not able to create a production-ready offering on top of those POCs. So from your perspective, doing IoT in-house, is it the right choice, or maybe trying to leverage some trusted partner as ClearBlade? It is better for long-term vision. As you said, IoT, this is a strategic direction, right? So probably doing it in-house, that actually provides more risks than someone might think at the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like anything else, right? A business wants to focus on their core competencies, and what you don't want to do, regardless of what your business is you don't want to try to become an IoT software company and build your own IoT software because, as you said, there's a lot of complexities. It is not easy. There's a lot of things you have to consider, particularly as you look to scale to, thousands to millions of devices.
Could you share any customer stories that tried to build something in-house, failed sometime along the way, and then decided to switch direction and leverage trusted partner?
In many of the customer use cases we see, it's a combination of building in house or going out and taking solutions that are out there and trying to piece them together to create a comprehensive solution. But at the end of the day, what you've done is you kind of cobbled together an in-house solution that's very difficult to manage and scale. So one specific customer I'm thinking of, a global company, they have more than a couple hundred buildings around the world that they operate and manage as part of their business. And they are trying to figure out ways to, like a lot of building operators, right? Operate more efficiently, reduce energy costs, those sorts of things. And they had a bunch of different tools, applications, sensors, building management systems, and all these, the different campuses all over the world. And they were getting all of this data, but it was disparate data, right? So what they were then trying to do internally was stitch that data together to try to make sense of it so that they could act on it to operate more efficiently. And it was a lot of challenges, right? They had difficulty aggregating the disparate data sets. And once they were able to do that, there were gaps that led to some suspicious kind of metrics and incorrect conclusions. So they weren't able to successfully report on some of the ESG initiatives that they had publicly stated they were going to hit over time, right? So they were looking for a system that could tie all of the different disparate data sets together, aggregate, visualize, and then act on that information. So the key here is that they had multiple systems in place that they were trying to stitch together themselves. They wanted to be able to keep those systems in place, leverage the existing investments. And so what they did is they actually did an RFP, which we were included in, but they also included all the well-known building management systems solutions providers out there. And we actually won that business. And we won it because we demonstrated the flexibility to be able to connect and ingest all those disparate data sets. We also demonstrated the ability to scale. As you can imagine, more than 200 buildings around the world generating large amounts of data. So we were able to prove that we could scale to handle that, and ultimately get to the point where this customer can onboard a new building with our system in a matter of a couple of weeks. They can actually be pulling all of the required data into ClearBlade and then leveraging ClearBlade again to visualize and act on that data, with the end goal being that they can report on their ESG initiatives and show the actual data that points to them, getting in the direction that they want to go.
Before I let you go to the second example, I want to underline a few things because they are extremely important based on my experience as well. What you said, the wrong conclusions or wrong recommendations based on IoT data, this is one of the main reasons why companies decide to shut down IoT initiatives. Because if IoT doesn't provide any value, there is no reason to invest in it. And they totally overlook what you just described, the overall complexity of the IoT ecosystem, especially if you try to create it in-house using some open source solutions. It gets pretty nasty pretty quickly, and you end up with some data, like essentially almost like random data, and you try to draw some conclusions which cannot be proper because you lack that perspective. And I think this is very, very important to make everyone aware that IoT is just a tool, and if you are using that tool wrongly, then there is no way you can get proper outputs out of it. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. That was key for this particular customer because they want to be able to save money and operate their buildings more efficiently. That's important, right? But then when you look at also it ties into overall corporate strategic initiatives that they're going to market with and saying, "Hey, we are going to hit these targets in this time frame." Being able to have the supporting data to show that was also very important as well.
Maybe you could provide the second example that you are talking about.
Yeah, so different industry. This customer is an aerospace manufacturer. Maintaining aircraft is obviously a very complex and expensive process involving highly specialized equipment. So what they wanted to do was understand. They need to understand where all of the maintenance equipment is in real time, and then being able to direct maintenance personnel where to find that equipment so they could service the aircraft. There's actually pretty significant FAA fines that are in place for these aerospace manufacturers if they aren't servicing aircraft according to a specific schedule. So it's very important that they know where this equipment is so that they can hit those schedules. So the operations team at this company in the past, they've gone out and tried to build this on their own. And they did it the way they did it was just go and engage with five, six, seven different sensor companies that were providing the sensors to track these assets, or they were going out and getting RFID tags and creating ultra wideband networks to try to track this stuff. So they had all these disparate systems, and they weren't able to provide their operations folks with a single unified view across an entire maintenance airfield, or at an even higher level across all of the maintenance airfields that they were tracking equipment in. And it led to some significant operational challenges, missing equipment, which meant the equipment either needed to be replaced, which is very expensive, or if not replaced, they were missing mandated schedule windows and thereby getting fined by the FAA. So what this company is today, they're using ClearBlade's intelligent assets to connect up over 1,500 different assets across 15 maintenance airfields, and they have real-time visibility and geofencing around all of those assets. They've set up alerts so that key stakeholders they get a text or an email when a piece of equipment leaves a designated area, and then service team members they can quickly see where all this equipment is located by viewing a phone, tablet, or the big monitors that are in the maintenance areas. The key here is that they'd already gone out and purchased sensors and asset trackers from multiple companies, and leveraging ClearBlade's flexibility, we're able to ingest all of that data from all these different sensor companies again into a single platform that we can aggregate, normalize, visualize, and alert on that data, and they now have a central place where they can manage this from. The ROI has been pretty significant for this customer in terms of reduction in having to purchase replacement equipment and also reduction in FAA fines.
Quite a few important topics here. First is the real-time visibility, and this is one of the core promise of IoT, right? It should give you real-time visibility into your assets, of course, provided that you can implement that right. And then you've got that single pane of glass that you've got view or infrastructure or your facilities, whatever you're tracking or monitoring, and you can drill down all the way to the single asset. If ClearBlade can provide this type of capabilities, it answers very, very important request that I hear on the market, that we should be able to see the broad level, like broad overview of what's going on, and then drill down into those layers of abstractions, because there is no other way. We need to improve the visibility by adding layers of abstractions, but what is important is to keep those relations between objects and abstractions that we added. And as Aaron explained in the previous meeting, this is the intelligent asset, as you just said, right? It gives you that capability, and it also gives you that structure, so you can build structure, a hierarchy of intelligent assets, and that enables that drill down capabilities, right?
Right, and I think the other thing that we hear from customers that's very significant is this: because we have that flexibility, we allow the customer to protect the investment that they've already made in whatever sensors or hardware they might already have out in the field. We're a software company. We're not coming in and saying, hey, to leverage ClearBlade, you've got to put all these new sensors out in the field in order to gather the data. We will take the data from whatever is existing, whatever's already out there. And I think that's a big point because again, I think a lot of companies that have gone down the IoT path are frustrated because they've gone with point solutions where you have to use a specific sensor and then that sensor company's software platform in order to access the data.
This is also the additional challenge that I see, that IoT fleet, a fleet of devices, is a very, very broad topic. And more often than not, customers use various devices from various vendors, and all of a sudden they end up in that mess that you've got number of protocols, number of data schemas, number of all of those different variants of representing some views on the physical assets, that it's very hard to put all of that into the common data model. And I believe this is also something that ClearBlade provides. As you said, like you are able to normalize the data, and all of that sudden, all of those very custom or very specific domains and the data models, they've got the same look and feel and provide the same value for the customers looking from the ClearBlade perspective.
Yep, absolutely. Again, it's that flexibility kind of across the whole kind of that whole stack of the solution.
We had Eric and Aaron during previous episodes explaining how to build and operate an IoT business, and this is a pretty difficult thing to do because of all of those operational and technical aspects, even for IT company. But most companies that are leveraging IoT, they're typically not IT companies. They've got their own business, let's say bakery or whatever else, and they would like to leverage the IoT capabilities provided by ClearBlade. So for that, you created the IoT maturity model that helps your customers to find a way around the IoT landscape, to find where they are at this landscape and how to evolve. Could you walk us through this model?
We've been in this space for a long time, since 2013, and we've seen a lot of different use cases and worked with a lot of different customers in different verticals. So we developed this maturity model over time, and I think it's interesting because I think it's more relevant today than it's ever been. Because what do you always hear when you go in and talk to a customer these days? First thing they want to talk about is AI, and that's great. There's a lot of value that we're going to be the companies are realizing today, and more value we're going to realize in the future. But AI is not the hardest part of this. Unlocking the data is the hardest part of this, and that really, in order to effectively leverage AI, you have to make sure that you are capturing that data, right? We've got machine data is the most prevalent data source on earth. And I think we're still, as an industry, still kind of struggling to unlock, aggregate, and normalize that data so that we can effectively use it for AI. And so really that's what we go through that with our customers, and we look at the maturity model and we say, okay, the first phase in this maturity model is all about the data. It's about gathering that raw data. You either have devices that are already connected, or you have devices that aren't connected and you need to connect. But we've got to get that data streaming into whether it's our platform running in your back office in an on-premise disconnected environment, or whether it's running in the cloud of your choice. We've got to start streaming that data. So we have to start there. As we go through this maturity model, I would say a lot of companies out there are in either that first phase, or they're in the second phase, which we've labeled interpretation of information and structures, right? And so now it's like, okay, you have the data, but now we have to start filtering it. We got to get rid of the noise. We got to really make sense of it. So we'll take that, and for instance, within like intelligent assets, we'll start doing some basic visualizations, and we'll start to get some initial insights into what's happening with your assets based on the data, right? So that's kind of that next phase. And again, I would say most of the customers we talk to today are in, somewhere around 1 and 2, maybe getting into phase 3. I mean, customers that have been using ClearBlade for a while. We've got some customers in the transportation and rail space that have been using ClearBlade for a number of years, and they're starting to get into some of these later stages in the maturity model. But now it's all about data content knowledge in this kind of third phase of the maturity model. So now it's about correlating data. It's about doing, advanced visualizations and really developing kind of digital twins using intelligent assets, starting to alert on via the digital twin model and intelligent assets, starting to alert and respond to specific events. And now here, based on the data that's being collected, the historical data that's being collected, now you can start to do, some early kind of prediction analytics. So again, I think we've seen, our experience, we've seen customers moving up to, up from 1 to 3. And now I would say, some of our kind of more advanced customers are into step 4, where they're taking all of the data, everything that's been done in steps 1, 2, and 3, and they are now using that for, diagnostics and decision making. So here it's really about modeling and then validation of those models. So we have customers doing command and control. So if certain thing happens out in the field, a piece of equipment, something goes outside of a standard deviation, then we're automatically taking some sort of control against that data, right? And actually shutting that equipment off or changing a setting on the equipment remotely. There's some concerns and issues with that. That's not for every customer in every industry, but for some customers that is an important part of their use case. So really starting to apply that, they're really taking that information, and now you can start to apply some more advanced machine learning as well. And then ultimately, once you're there, you get to that the fifth stage in that maturity model, right? And now we can really start talking about AI, right? It's like everyone wants to jump to step number 5 when you start talking to them about this, but you got to go through 1 through 4. And once you do that, now we can start really optimizing for automation and self-learning, right? We can start applying advanced AI. We can start, we can take the data that's been captured and start to build more advanced AI models. We can either help the customer build those models, or they may have models that they built. We can run them in the cloud, or we can run them out in the edge. That's, we have customers that have, one of the main reasons they've selected ClearBlade was our ability to run at the edge and actually to run AI models at the edge. So we're now running the model remotely close to the machine that's generating the data, and that we want to manage, and that we want to. So, this is really where we ultimately want to be. This is, I think, when people talk about, IoT, edge AI, AI. I mean, this is the promised land, right? If we want to get everyone to here, but again, it takes some time to get all the equipment and all of the data to a point where everything is connected and we understand what's happening, and then we can deliver this. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, and it is very close to my own experience that especially like new customers without any IoT experience, they are focused on the AI. They want to start from AI. They want to start from those predictions, from models and all of that stuff. And I always need to push back a bit and say that first you need to focus on the basics, on the connectivity, because without gathering high quality data, there is no point in doing any type of advanced analytics, AI included. So I think this is very, very important, and your maturity model presents just that if you are in IoT, that because you are interested in leveraging AI, you need to be prepared that this is at the end of the road. It's not something that you will start from the very beginning. And the other thing that I would like to highlight is something I observed a number of times, that companies start with POC to connect some equipment to the backend, that might be cloud backend or whatever else, and they struggle with that for a number of weeks or sometimes months. And after they finally connect those devices, that equipment to the backend, they really do not have any idea how to proceed from there. So the POC essentially dies. And I think your maturity model, this is basically the roadmap, right? You need to connect, because that connection joins the physical world with digital representation. You need to establish trust, and this is something I would like to double down, that as soon as you establish connectivity, at the same time you need to establish trust, and trust between devices and the backend system, so to be sure that the identity of your devices is very, very strong. There is no way to fake identities of your equipment, that you encrypt traffic on devices and during a transition between device and the backend. So there's lots of things that need to be covered only at the first stage, and then you need to proceed with more, I would say, business type of functionalities once you've got that solid framework in place.
Yeah, very, very true. And I think I completely agree with you. I mean, we saw plenty of examples, kind of in the early days of IoT where you'd engage with a customer on a proof of concept and you could hit all the objectives, like check all the boxes, everything goes great. But then what? Like at that point in time, a lot of companies didn't have either the executive sponsorship or the strategic direction and budget to be able to say, okay, we're going to take this successful POC and now implement it into production. Again, the market's maturing, it's changing. As we talked about earlier, we're now seeing a lot of companies where connectivity and IoT is a strategic part of the business.
Let's proceed to the step number 2, which is once you've got established connectivity, you can start to gather data and to filter the noise. This is very, very important, because you will get tons of data from various sensors, and you need to be able to verify the quality of the data. And for that, the domain expertise is crucial, right? So probably you work with domain experts, maybe with workers on the production line, because those people know their stuff, right? They know if those readings from this device, if that is the way it should operate, or maybe you need to change some parameters of configuration to make that specific piece of equipment operate the way it needs to operate. After you've got the connectivity, you use visualizations basically to help you understand what you're gathering and maybe start building those relations between various entities in your whole fleet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a good example of that for us is the work we've done in the rail space. Rail, from a platform and edge perspective, some of the large class one rails were really our first customers going back, 7, 8 years ago. And, we were by no means domain experts in rail. In fact, we didn't know much about rail at the point in time, right? But we worked very closely with the experts to understand what was important to them and what they were looking to, the challenges, problems they were looking to solve, and really helping to, architect the solution in such a way that it met those objectives. And so now, years later, we actually have a lot of rail expertise, right? But it's very important to work with the domain experts, either within the customer or working with, partners that focus on specific vertical industries, right? That's another go-to-market approach for us. But yeah, very critical part of the process.
Exactly, because IoT is just an enabler, and
Mhm.
it is not able to replace the human expertise, at least not at the very early stage. It amplifies your impact as the domain expert, but it's not able to replace you, because you need to train those models, but we will get to training later on. So let's proceed from stage 2 to stage 3, which is data, content, knowledge. And this stage, what we've got is we are building on the foundation of the connectivity, and we know the data that we are gathering, that that data is at sufficient level of quality. So we can start to do some data correlation only then, right? This is extremely important. I want to highlight that for everyone, that if you try to do some data correlation at the very beginning, you might get those false outcomes, as you just said, right? Because the data is not cleaned, it is not ready to be consumed. And this is one of common mistakes I see across the board. So only once you get to the third stage, you're ready to create some data correlation, to implement some advanced visualization, which is also very important because it will give your domain experts extra tools to work the data, draw some conclusions, and maybe at that stage you are ready to improve your operations, your process, your manufacturing, whatever you are using, even the rail, right? I believe that at this stage you can see the first outcomes because you've got the high quality data, you've got some correlation in place, and you can start building those predictions and enable alerting, which is also something that provides tons of value once it is implemented on top of high quality data.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, we have customers that we work with that they may have the initial kind of data ingestion problem solved, where they have data, and we've several customers where they have more data than they know what to do with. They have data from 4 or 5 different sources, massive amounts of data sitting in a data lake, and they they don't know what to do with it. And it's because they don't have step 3 solved, right? So we can come in from a ClearBlade perspective, we can take that existing data and we can stream it into ClearBlade, into intelligent assets, and start to help with that data content knowledge piece. So now it's like we've got clean data. We can start to do some of this correlation and visualizations and start to get some outcomes.
That is correct. What I used to say is that the data lakes that was a huge thing a few years ago, but then most of them morphed into data swamps. That
Right.
customers had tons of data of actually unknown quality. That was even worse, right? Because if you do not know quality of the data, basically you cannot trust it. And all of a sudden, that whole data lake movement was on the reality check that you need to do something with that data before you can consume it. So let's move one step further. We've got that data content knowledge already in check. The data is of high quality. We are starting to make some predictions. We can go to the stage number 4, which is applied information diagnostic and decision making. So this is where we actually start to see the business outcomes of the work and the investment that we did in all of the steps before, right? So you can start to do some modeling, you can start that command and control operations because you can trust the communication, like the two-way data stream between your command and control center and your fleet of devices. And at this stage, because you've got high quality data, you're ready for machine learning. I really, really love the way that you structured the maturity model. The machine learning comes at the almost the very end once you know the data, know the assets, and you've got the command and control capabilities in place.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a customer that's, as an example, right? If we are remotely monitoring and managing water pumps for a customer in a very remote location, that customer wants to be able to take action on that equipment if something starts to operate outside of a range, because what's the other option for them, right? Is that they're not able to do that. The equipment fails. They have downtime. They've got to roll a truck. I mean, these are remote locations. I mean, there's all kinds of things, but being able to get out in front of that with this is really important to them.
That is great example of real life implementation of that step. So the final stage is automation, and the automation, it is basically something that takes us almost to the fully autonomous systems, right? So there is established communication, we've got machine learning models in place, maybe you've got also some rule engines, and at this stage we are almost ready to essentially shut down all the lights in a factory, because it will operate on its own, producing high quality outcomes. and even optimizing itself because all of the processes and tools that you implemented along the way.
Yeah, and I think that's what's exciting, right? Is that really that self-learning aspect of it is kind of the next, the next phase. You've been operating in that fifth mode, right? And ultimately getting to the point where you're implementing, self-learning systems is really what we want to get to.
From the hardware perspective and the software perspective, we are almost there to create those self-learning systems in the real world. Not only in the lab, but to make them operational in the natural environment. But in order to leverage that capability, we need to go through all of the journey that you just described using this maturity model. And this is something that we should have on a roadmap, maybe as the point that we want to reach in the future. But for sure, that should not be this automation. This should not be the very first stage, because there are lots of homework to be done before you can reach that level.
Yep. Yeah, agree. But I think the key in looking at the maturity model is like when you talk about scale, it's important if a company is looking at choosing a software partner to help them move along that maturity model, it's critical that the software has the flexibility to address each one of those areas as you progress along that path, right? All the way from just getting the data to, AI and self-learning systems, right? You want to go with a provider that can address all of those different kind of points in the model.
Very true, because this is a journey, and
Mm-hmm.
when you create a strong foundation, you build on top of it, right? So even in this model, you can clearly see that every next step basically utilize the outputs of the step just before
Mm-hmm.
it. And if you choose a wrong technology, then you might have issues, for instance, with scalability, right? So you establish the connectivity part, you filtered all the noise, but then when you try to extract value from this data, you hit the scalability limit, and essentially you need to almost start from the very beginning. So I think that is very, very important to find a trusted partner that is able to take you and lead you through the whole journey, because as you said, IoT, this is the strategic decision and strategic investment. This is something that will hopefully stay within the enterprise and will help to provide better outcome for the business, better service for the end users, and at the same time it will reduce your operational cost. So it is like win-win-win scenario
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
Yep, that's a good way to put
So
it. Totally agree.
let's say that I'm a business owner, I have nothing to do with IT and IoT, and I want to start leveraging the capabilities. Maybe I found that IoT maturity model, but to be honest, I don't really understand what I'm looking at. How can you help me to start my IoT journey and set the proper expectations along the way?
Yeah, I mean, if it's not a technical person, the key first step is understanding what that person's business problem is, right? I mean, because you have to, the problem, one of the problems with IoT is that it's so broad and can cover so many different things that you can kind of get lost, right? And so if you're going to successfully implement an IoT solution, you have to have a specific problem to address, and then you have to successfully address that problem, prove that you've addressed it, and show what the value is, right? So those are the key things that we'll work with the stakeholders and typically, business people or operational people to understand. They may come to us with 10 problems. Okay, great. That's great that you have 10. Let's start with one or two, because again, it's really important to get the quick win. And then once you understand what that problem is, then you can say, okay, now let's walk you through the IoT maturity model for this issue. We're going to start here. Here's every step in the process. That's from a sales perspective, when you're working with new customers, that's the most important thing. What is the thing that's keeping them up at night, and then helping them understand how you're going to address that specific problem, agree what the successful outcome is, and then go tackle the problem.
I think that's a great way to put it, because it shows the perspective that first you define the problem. And to be honest, from my own experience, sometimes that is one of the most difficult tasks in the IoT engagement, to define the problem, because customer, if they do not know the capabilities of IoT, then they cannot tell what they need if they do not know capabilities of the tool, right? So you need to essentially educate them along the way, and at the same time learn as much as possible about their domain, about their business, to help them define the outcome. And once you agree on the outcome and the definition of success, as you said, which is extremely important, then you can take the maturity model and say, okay, but we are not going to start by that outcome that you want to achieve, because we want to create the foundation for your future growth, and that growth requires us to build the framework. And this is how you build it, starting from capturing data and for doing all of those little technical improvements, but you always got that business goal in mind. I think this is crucial, and I'm so happy that you brought it up, because the maturity model on its own, it might look like it is focused on technology, but at the end of the day, IoT is not about technology at all.
Couldn't agree with you more. And that's something that a lot of companies, I mean, we've done it as well, right? Have kind of fallen into that where it's like you can get, I mean, IoT is very complex. It's very technical, but at the end of the day, it's important to understand the reason why are you bringing that technology to bear? It's not about the tech, right? You're bringing that technology to the customer to help solve a problem. That's what it's about.
Yeah, exactly. And if you educate the customer, then they will find very creative ways to utilize even your own framework, your own ClearBlade stack, right? So as you said with the rail example, at the end of the day, customers will be extremely creative, and they will actually show you some very unique ways to use your tools in maybe a setup that you never thought that they might be used, right? So it is like
Yeah,
two-way
happens all the time.
exactly. So it is like two-way relation that you teach your customers about tech, and they teach you about the same tech from totally different angle. I think
Yeah.
that's great thing. That's what I really love about IoT. That this is essentially a constant learning. So if you know
Mhm.
the technology, you think that you do, for instance, like let's take the MQTT protocol, like this is just a communication. So you know the technical specification of it, you know how to implement that, but then some customer can find a way to leverage that capability in some unique way that essentially opens up way more opportunities that you ever thought that you can achieve using that piece of tech. And since ClearBlade offers the whole stack, I believe that you've got a number of aha moments with your customers that show the true potential of your solutions that you never thought exist in there.
Yeah. It is one of the cool things about IoT, right? There's always new use cases, right? And so you get to work across a pretty broad set of companies doing different things, doing some very innovative things. So it makes it very interesting.
Could you share the biggest aha moments from your conversations with customers that led you to look at your tech stack totally from different perspective?
I mean, I would say one of them probably in this intelligent buildings use case. We talked about it a little bit earlier with the customer. We're having a lot of success with this specific customer, and now it's expanding into other intelligent buildings opportunities, which is intelligent buildings is actually leading to this concept of intelligent infrastructure. So, it's great to have an intelligent building. People talk about smart cities, right? Intelligent cities, whatever you want to call them, but you're never going to have that with the the approach that's been taken to date, which we've already talked about, where you got a bunch of different point solutions doing different things. You're never going to have a truly integrated intelligent city until you have this intelligent infrastructure. So you think of IoT connectivity as foundational as as any utility. to a city or a country, right? It's that important to be able to have that flexible data integration layer as part of your critical, infrastructure for these environments, right? And so that's been interesting because it really started with the smart or the intelligent buildings use case. We did our first intelligent buildings solution about six and a half years ago, and again, similar to rail, we weren't experts in the space by any means, but we had that flexibility, right? And we were addressing some specific use cases for a customer, and it's led us to where we are now, where it's not just about buildings, it's not even just about cities, it's about providing, this infrastructure and getting people to look at it, to look at IoT in a little bit different way. That's been really exciting and something that has really developed over the course of the last year or so for us. And we've got some real exciting opportunities we're working on in that area.
I think you put it perfectly that IoT and connectivity, this is something that will become a basic commodity, right? Everyone is going to expect that every single piece of equipment is connected, that the cities are smart and interconnected.
Right.
And the extensive framework created by ClearBlade that enables to put all of that utility to the totally different level, right? You can, of course, establish that communication and make it secure, scalable, and whatnot, but then you can take it to the level that will enable totally new use cases that when Eric and Ara started, no one thought about it, and now they are totally doable using the stack that you created. So you mentioned the flexibility of ClearBlade, and I think this is also one of the core strengths of this solution, that it is very easy to adapt and to extend to the business needs.
Yeah, and then if I get asked, kind of, get asked all the time, what's your differentiator? There's all the other IoT platform companies out there, software companies, and it's flexibility. I mean, there's other things you could say, but at the end of the day, our flexibility is really what sets us apart from everyone else out there.
I totally agree. So let's summarize, because we covered quite a bit today.
Sure.
From what needs to be done to start the IoT journey if you're not IT company. We've got the maturity model, we've got ClearBlade experts that can guide you through that journey, starting from business needs, the first implementations, and then basically iterating. We covered most challenges and the frustrations of executives that you meet on daily basis and the ways that you help them to mitigate them and to solve their problem to provide the actual business outcomes. So that's lots of useful information. But if you could deliver a single message to our viewers, what would that be?
I think that the most important point for a customer to consider around IoT is that, I mean, everyone wants to be successful, right? You're implementing something because you want to be successful with it, right? So the key then is to how do you get to business value, demonstrated business value as quickly as possible with your IoT project? That is the key, right? We've talked about in the past a lot of these POCs, kind of these science experiments that failed. One of the reasons they failed is that they either took a long time or they took a long time, and at the end of that period of time, there was no business value demonstrated, right? So we believe, and our customers have been telling us that time to value is critical. So if you're going to deliver value quickly, what does that mean? Well, what you don't want to do is you don't want to spend months and months and months or a year and millions of dollars building something from the ground up just to get to the point where you can start to show business value. You want to take, someone like ClearBlade who has that foundational software, that end-to-end software already built, right? You want to implement that. You want to customize that based upon your specific use case. And you want to be able to show success and business value in a matter of weeks, right? Not months or a year or years, right? I think that's really the key for success here. And I think that approach of building all of this stuff that's been taken over the course of the last 6, 7 years is one of the reasons that a lot of these projects have failed. So that would be the number one thing that I would want to share with someone and really talking about, hey, how you really want to be successful with this.
Thank you so much for this insightful conversation. I'm sure that the viewers learned a ton about IoT and how to leverage IoT in business from your brand. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Lukasz. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
This was the last episode of the One Clear series. I invite you to put your questions in the comments and ask ClearBlade's experts for advice and guidance. We'll answer your question during the live stream concluding this video series. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Lukasz Malinowski.